Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. Landis, we're diving into 13 teams. Is that enough for you?
Feels like a lot. Let's do it.
Let's prep it up. About 7 minutes, 6-7 minutes a team. This is our mega spring football preview, part 1. We are covering the first 13 Northern teams that have begun spring football or are getting close to starting spring football practice. 15 practices in the spring. You guys know that. Almost everybody ends it with the spring game as the 15th practice. Most of those spring games, April 13th, April 20th, April 27th. I think Washington's doing it May 4th. Indiana, I think, is doing it on a weeknight on April 18th, but that's the main thing. So some schools are already underway. Others are getting ready to start next week. And so if you're a fan of a Northern team, why did I do my team? You will be part of Spring Mega Preview Part 2 because your team probably isn't starting spring practice until the late teens or even the 20s here in March. So we are going in order of when you started practice. We're going to talk about how many of your top 35 guys from last year, that's number of snaps guys played. Not the 35 best players, but the 35 guys who were on the field the most on offense and defense. For most teams, that's around 200 snaps. How many of those guys are back? We're going to talk about how many coaches did you change? Then we're going to just mention, when your spring game is. So everybody, get your schedule ready. Get your calendar ready. We're starting with BYU because they went early, Landis. The Cougars started on February 29th, the only team in the North that started in February. Of their top 35, they have 24 back, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
That's not the most in the North, but it's near the top in the North. They changed 2 assistants from last year. Their spring game is March 22nd, so they're almost like on a different schedule than everybody else, that they're going to get this out and get this done. The quarterback battle and what we will learn this spring and what we're talking about is like not the biggest issues or questions for the season, but what teams are trying to work on and get figured out this spring. You thought the quarterback battle was the most interesting thing because they might come up with an answer that is none of the above, and they need to get that figured out in these 15 practices.
Yeah, like I don't know how likely it is the answer is none of the above, but I felt like the tenor of their initial search just felt like the results, I guess, felt a little underwhelming. I think like they tried to take some bigger swings than ultimately what they ended up getting, which was Gary Bohannon and Trayson Bourget, who's actually preferred walk-on, which I didn't realize. So he's not even really like part of this competition. It's mostly Gary Bohannon and Jake Retzlaff, the returning starter, I guess, who played or started a handful of games last year, replacing Keaton Slovis. So they were like really pounding the pavement to find the transfer quarterback and ended up what they ended up with. But there were bigger swings, as I mentioned. Like they looked at Curtis Rourke was one of the guys they went after. Braden Shager from Hawaii, who ended up going back to Hawaii. Taylon Green from Boise State. And none of these guys were necessarily a top transfer quarterbacks on the market, but I think they were widely regarded probably as better options than what BYU ended up with. And I'm just a little curious as to whether BYU might go through these 15 practices, play this battle out, which is really a 2-man battle, but then still look at what's available in the second transfer window. Once some jobs are won at other places, maybe an intriguing guy or two might jump into the portal. And if BYU is quarterback hungry enough that it might take another swing at the portal after spring ball ends for them.
Pretty good legacy of BYU quarterback play in recent years. We are not that far removed from Zach Wilson lighting things up in the COVID year at BYU. And you may have noticed that the Minnesota Vikings at times last season started a rookie quarterback named Jaron Hall, who is from BYU. Sure. So this is a place, right? This should be attractive. We weren't sure when we did our specific quarterback Northern discussion where we went through all 26 quarterback situations, more than a month ago now. That was still at the point where Washington, they had gotten Will Rogers in the portal, but then he had gone back in the portal. You didn't know who Washington's quarterback was going to be exactly. And in that moment, we were like, hey, like be on alert for this is a school, this is a place in Washington. They throw the ball. They will be at the top of the list for post-spring quarterback transfers. Then Will Rogers said after we did that show, but I'm not leaving. I'm staying. So Washington doesn't have that question. It feels like BYU, yes, could be, if they aren't sure about what they see, could be near the top of the list for any post-spring quarterback transfers around the country.
In the North, yes. I'm not familiar enough, I guess, with the quarterback situations around the entire country.
And you're not
But
supposed to be. They can
right, but
cram it. We don't care about their quarterbacks.
right. But of the teams that we care about,
Yeah.
yeah, they'd be pretty high up there, if not number one, I think. Which is like it's a very strange dynamic. It would be like, I don't know, the thing you'd point to the most to just like illustrate how crazy quarterback movement is now. If a team that took 2 transfers in the early window was left unsatisfied by that work and then added a third in the second window.
Maybe Michigan if spring doesn't go well, right? If it doesn't go well at Michigan, it'd be like, whoop, they go right to the top of the list. But we're not assuming that, but certainly possible. When you think, a lot of people, because there's so many transfers, and again, more than half the northern schools have added transfers or expecting to start like new transfers this season. When you do that, you feel like, okay, well, they've kind of gotten a handle on things. BYU is a little more up in the air. So what are we watching during the rest of these BYU spring football practices? Are they getting an answer at quarterback? Because they might have a chance to try to go dig out another guy if they need to. All right, let's move on to our second team. These are the Cincinnati Bearcats. They started practice on March 4th. So they are underway this week as we record. 3-9 a year ago, 20 of their top 35 players back. 2 new assistants. The biggest one of those, Tyson Veit, the new defensive coordinator. They made a change there and brought him in from Iowa State. That's a big deal. Their spring game is on April 13th. And coming off a 3-win year, like they are in a very interesting spot because I think they have a chance to be pretty good up front on both sides of the ball. And they really might be able to, like, not that they have to establish that identity, but reestablish that identity this spring. Could they be dominant on both sides of the ball? On the offensive side, they have all 5 offensive line starters back, which is a great place to start. And then they have Corey Kiner as their running back. Like, I think they feel like they can run it, and they might elevate their run game even more. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they did lose, a good amount of guys off their defensive line. But the guy who's back, Dante Corleone, among Northern defensive tackles a year ago, he was the 4th highest graded guy by PFF. Number 1 was Mason Graham at Michigan, who helped Michigan win the national championship. Number 2 was Howard Cross at Notre Dame, who was like a borderline All-American. Number 3 was Jerzon Newton at Illinois, who we had as a finalist for our Northern Player of the Year award and is going to go high in the NFL draft. And then it was Dante Corleone. And so I think the depth of experience they have on the offensive line, and I think they have an All-American candidate at defensive tackle. Can Scott Satterfield in year 2, like, is this going to be like a physical, like, let's get after, knock heads together, that you start showing that in the spring on the way to maybe getting to an above 500 record in year 2 of this regime?
Yeah, I could see it. And I actually think they might have an All-American candidate on their offensive line too, and Luke Kandra. Like he was, he got first team All Big 12. Yeah, he got first team All Big 12. I think from the Big 12 teams, and I think he also was like AP first team All Big 12.
And I think I think he was first team All North on KOTN. I think he was
one of the higher graded guards in college football last year. We didn't talk a whole lot about him or really Dante Corleone either, which
we never talk about guards as much as you want to talk about guards.
Well, that's true.
We'll adjust that. We'll fix that.
Yeah, we'll adjust it. But no, I think, especially for like another team that's like in quarterback purgatory a little bit, trying to figure some things out, I certainly can see a pathway to Cincinnati, like really using this spring to like cultivate an identity of just being like really physical up front, running the ball. And then, relying on Dante Corleone to kind of be the guy that steadies them as they go through some other changes on the defensive side of the ball. But I don't know. I guess like I never considered Cincinnati in those terms last year because it wasn't really a great season for them. But 5 starters back on the offensive line, man, like that's like anywhere that's noteworthy. When a couple of them were as good as like the interior of this offensive line, I think is a shot to be like excellent. Which is like really intriguing. So I do think that this spring could be a situation where Cincinnati like just tries to build up, an identity of being one of the more physical teams in the country.
And it's one of those things like, right, when you're new coach in the program, you try, who doesn't want to establish a physical identity, right? They love that.
Yeah.
Love that stuff. So it's one of those things like Illinois, though, it didn't have a great year last year, even though Cherzon Newton was awesome. Right. So
Mhm.
it's like they need more than that. But I do there was some really good defensive tackle play in the North last year. Like Michigan, like won the national title in part because their defensive tackles were so good, and Howard Cross and like the guys we already mentioned. We needed to have more Dante Corleone discussions this year. He has a chance to be in the mix, right? To be the best interior defensive lineman in the North. So
Yeah, he
um
definitely does.
he doesn't have to prove that in spring, but it's a reminder. All right.
We have
Next.
a problem. We have a problem here, by the way, because I'm looking at Luke Kandra's profile on Cincinnati's website.
Yeah.
On his bio, it has listed all Big 12 first team AP, all Big 12 second team coaches, Walter Camp All America second team, AP All America third team, all portal team from the Athletic and on 3, and the Athletic mid season all transfer team, and no mention of being on the KOT and All North team. So we gotta get that going.
That's on me. I am also our publicist. And so I did send to Washington that Michael Penix Jr. was named the King of the North as the Northern Player of the Year. Sent him the graphic.
And
Not a
they
huge
said delete
response.
spam. Yeah.
But I don't know that I informed Cincinnati of Luke Kandra's honor. So let me get on that. Cincinnati has been rare. We have sent out the word this spring to all the schools in the North. Hey, we got this show. We want to have people on. We might want to swing by practice this spring. We want to make sure we're getting all your information. Zach's been very responsive. So thanks to Cincinnati for that. It's right down the road from us here. Maybe I'll go down and present it to Luke Kandra in person. And it'll be this. It'll say, here, let me run this past you. KOTN. If I just was that, hold on a second. It says KOTN, good job. Is that rise to the level of showing up in person? Maybe we'll film a video of me handing this and Luke Kandra sticking me in a trash can. Pitt, as we gear up for the huge Cincinnati Pitt game in week 2 this year, the Pitt Panthers, they're on equal starting lines. They also started spring practice on March 4th, spring game on April 13th, 3-9 a year ago. 19 of their top 35 back, 6 new assistants. And this is where I think the focus is for Pitt this spring. Completely new offensive staff. So they also lost Charlie Partridge, their defensive line coach, who went to the NFL, which was like a loss for them. That was not planned. Offensively, Pat Narduzzi, to his credit, said like, okay, it's not good enough. We got to start over. They brought in Cade Bell from East Carolina, a couple other East Carolina players and coaches. They're going to go up tempo, and they are installing that right now. It's a whole new offense. And Pat Narduzzi, even since practice has started, has said like, we're going to run some bad routes. We're going to do some things wrong. But like they are starting over on the offensive side of the ball. Luke Fickell in Wisconsin kind of did this last year, right? I mean, I appreciate at the very least veteran coaches who are willing to make a sweeping change on the side of the ball where they are not the expert, right? So Pat Narduzzi is a defensive coach, maybe has been more conservative offensively in the past and just said like enough is enough. So Cade Bell is an offensive coordinator that a lot of people really like. And they have Nate Yarnell, who, we've talked on this show about Eli Holstein, the transfer from Alabama. Like what kind of quarterback competition could they be in? They're talking a lot about Nate Yarnell, who played at the end of last year. He's the number one guy. They love his leadership. Like he's their guy. And I think we'll see what we get to in September. But for right now, installing a whole new offense, they feel like they have an existing quarterback who's capable of handling that. And so go make mistakes, man. Like I just am, not that doing it the old way can't work too, but I think you put a ceiling on yourself. And again, we have to remind people that Pitt had a bad year last year, a 3-win year last year. But the 2 previous years, they were one of a handful of teams in the country that had double-digit wins each of the 2 previous years in 2021 and 2022. This is not like this has been a failing program. They had one bad year, but that was enough for major change. And so I'm very intrigued to see what Pitt might look like offensively this year. And it's what they're already starting to work on this March.
It's such a departure from what they were, and I think frankly what Pat Narduzzi prefers to be.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fascinating. However it shakes out, it's gonna be fascinating to watch. I did find it interesting that I think they have 3 quarterbacks, I guess, that could conceivably be their starter, but that Cade Bell, immediately upon showing up, was like, no, Yarnell's our guy. Like I actually was a little surprised by that, and it was like the new guy that kind of voiced that based off nothing other than, I guess, watching tape from the previous year. I'm a little curious about maybe that being more open, perhaps than they're letting on, but we'll see. It probably is beneficial maybe to just pick a guy and let him go out there and run it when you're trying to install what feels like a pretty drastically new offensive system. So I would put Pitt's spring game has to be up there among the most intriguing, just to see what this thing looks like, right?
Yeah, because you don't, and it's great for Pitt fans, to go out. It's like, what does a Cade Bell offense look like? With the Pitt version of that. So, I love departure. I love head coaches doing things they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Reluctant. You've seen the meme, because it caught my eye because I'm one of these. Have you seen the thing where it's there's nothing like the love between a grumpy dad who didn't want to get a dog and the dog that the family eventually got?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the case there's nothing like the love between a grumpy defensive minded head coach and the young up and coming offensive coordinator he never wanted to have to hire. Right. And so, and also sometimes sometimes it blows up in your face. Sometimes the dog, goes to the bathroom all over the house. And you're like,
Sure.
Why did we get this dog? I was so happy without a dog. But I think this has a chance to work. But there's a lot of reason to watch Pitt football this spring.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And based off where they were last year, to say that I'm excited about watching Pitt's offense, that's no small statement.
Yeah. Congrats. Next up is Ohio State. Ohio State opened spring practice on Tuesday, March 5th. Spring gamers April 13th. 3 new assistants for the Buckeyes. They have 23 of their top 35 back. A lot's been made about a lot of the guys, especially on the defensive side of the ball, who turned down a chance to go to the NFL to come back this year. 11-2 a year ago. The defense is so known, Landis. And as we record this on Thursday, a bunch of veteran Ohio State defensive players spoke with the media on Thursday morning, and they're talking about national title. They're talking about they came back because they had lost 3 straight games to Michigan. So there are not really almost any questions on the defensive side of the ball. And frankly, it's the same questions that this team had last year, which is the play at quarterback and on the offensive line going to be good enough? And at quarterback, it's transfer Will Howard from Kansas State battling with Devin Brown, who was battling with Kyle McCord a year ago. And on the offensive line, it's 4 of the 5 same guys, but who played all of last year. But we still are are they good enough? Can they get better? Could they move some guys around? What do you think is more important to find out about Ohio State this spring? Offensive line. Okay. All right. Is it definitely good enough, or do they definitely have to do more in August, or do they definitely need to lock in on this quarterback situation?
Man, that's tough to pick. I probably quarterback, right? I don't know. It's the most important position, right? I think it has to be the quarterback. And it's not the end of the world that that's uncertain right now, but it was funny to me. Did you hear what Denzel Burke said about Will Howard on Thursday?
No.
So Denzel Burke, who our pal Austin Ward, covering Ohio State, calls Ohio State's truth teller, said, he was asked, what do you think of Will Howard? And Denzel Burke goes, Will Howard. Well, it's early. But you know what? He said it's early, but I'm going to keep it real. I need to see more. I was
Wow.
like, okay, here we go. But that's like, I mean, that's Denzel would probably say that about probably just about anybody on the roster other than himself,
Yeah.
because I think he's the kind of guy that wants to light a fire under people. But I do think it like underscores the urgency of the situation. They were left underwhelmed by the quarterback play last year, and it needs to be significantly better. Like, yes, the offensive line play certainly played a factor in how poor the quarterback play was at times last year. But I also think a good quarterback can overcome some offensive line deficiencies if Ohio State ends up having some. So I think that finding the right guy at QB kind of supersedes anything else with Ohio State right now.
It's such a transformation a little bit that this, Ryan Day took over in 2019 and he's a quarterback guru and a passing game guru and it's an offensive team. Although they did have a great defense in 2019 and did not have a great defense in 20 or 21. But like this really is like a defensive team right now because you could go probably like 1 through 15 with Ohio State right now and be like rock solid defensively. But without Marvin Harrison Jr., you're not exactly sure. Lots of talent, lots of 5 stars. You're not exactly sure because there were times last year where it felt like Marvin Harrison Jr. was the whole offense. It's like, okay. And then when he didn't play in the bowl game, it was like, oh, yeah, he was the whole offense. They are non-functional without him. They also had a quarterback injury. But, that idea, they're obviously really good at running back, but they're going to miss tight end Cade Stover. And again, like the offensive line last year was like kind of okay, but not to the Ohio State. There's a lot of questions on the offense. So Chip
Yeah,
Kelly is
for
here to
sure.
help Ryan Day figure that out. But like that's where the eyeballs are this spring. That and I think I think you're right that they've got to get the quarterback situation. They have to have no matter who it is and whether they like pick a guy or not. Ohio State needs to have confidence in its quarterback situation coming out of the spring. And
Yes.
like 2 practices in, which is what they are right now, I don't think anybody would say that they are at that point. Not that they should be, but they have 13 practices left to get there.
Yeah, they do. They need to get there. And just quickly on the offensive line, like I do think the door is still very much open, I think, for Ohio State to add on the offensive line via the transfer portal after spring ball if this doesn't go right. Like I I could see them still looking at a tackle if the right one's there and if they're not super impressed with what they see this year. Like that I don't want to make the quarterback talk like overshadow the fact that they need to figure out specifically the right side of their offensive line, but really the whole thing. It just wasn't up to the standard last year.
All right, those are the first 4 teams we want to talk about this spring. When we come back, Notre Dame's on the list, Penn State, Utah, Oregon, Iowa, a lot more teams to talk about. The first part of our mega spring football preview right here on Kings of the North. Next up on our mega spring preview, Northwestern started practice on March 5th. No spring game for the Wildcats. They kind of don't do that there. And also they tore down their stadium. So there's nowhere to play it, even if they wanted to have it. They have 25 guys back of their top 35, which is pretty good. 8-4 a year ago. Surprise season, as everybody knows, after firing Pat Fitzgerald. And their year 1 of David Braun was enough to get him the full-time job. And as a result, he did kind of turn over the coaching staff in a pretty significant way. He was supposed to be the defensive coordinator last year. He had been hired by Pat Fitzgerald to do that. So he was the defensive coordinator while he was also the head coach. He promoted Tim McGarrigle, the linebackers coach, to be the defensive coordinator this year. And then he wiped out a little bit of the offensive staff, brought in a new offensive coordinator. So 4 new assistants for Northwestern. And although they have a lot of guys back, they actually have some very specific sort of substantial holes to fill. One is, and this is not on my list, but they got to find a quarterback, and they could be in, and David Braun has talked about this because they have started practice already. I think they have half an eye on the portal for a quarterback, depending how things go. Brendan Sullivan, who played some last year when Ben Bryant was hurt, is the presumptive starter, but I think they'll keep looking around. But what they really need is offensive line help and safety help. And so they're working they have to work through that this spring, Landis. But I also think that David Braun has said, they're going to keep looking in the portal there. For the secondary help, they lost Rod Hurd, who was their really good nickelback last year. He transferred to Notre Dame. It's like the second time in 5 years. Northwestern lost a pretty good safety to Notre Dame. Last time was Brandon Joseph. They also lost a couple guys in the secondary who transferred to West Virginia. So they have some holes there. And then on the offensive line, this is one of those things, right? It's like building offensive line depth can be difficult anywhere. So I think they have 3 guys back who played last year. So it's like, all right, 3 of the 5 are okay. But just like running through their offensive line recruiting the past couple years, and this is like, it's like, congratulations, you're screwed. Which is we should play. Like we've talked about, like the games we want to play here. Like our producer Mike has good ideas for like, what can you like the framework of a discussion. Congratulations, you're screwed. I think would be a good thing to do here. Northwestern in the class of 2020, so 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. This would be the 5th year guys right now, right? They had 3 offensive linemen in that class of guys who would be 5th year guys right now. One of them's around, who's probably going to play. The other 2 guys in that class, one of them is Peter Skoronski, who left for the first round of the NFL draft after 3 years. And the other is Josh Preeb, who started last year and was so good he transferred to Michigan. So It's like, hey, if your guys had not been as good, you might have like some veteran 5th year offensive lineman, which is a very normal thing to have. Instead, one's in the NFL and one's playing for the defending national champs. Congratulations, you're screwed, because in like almost everybody else, they have a lot of guys since then who just like haven't played. They have offensive linemen who played 12 snaps and 5 snaps and 132 snaps. And so they have a lot to figure out there. Jordan Knox is a 2nd-year guy who played 132 snaps as a freshman last year. But that's just a difficult situation, I think, when you're kind of this level of team, which is like a winning Big Ten Northern team. But when you get in a situation like that, sometimes losing a couple guys. So you're a safety transferred to Notre Dame, an offensive lineman transferred to Michigan, another offensive lineman left for the NFL after 3 years. You can put yourself in a hole a little bit almost by some of your guys succeeding too well.
Yeah, you've done too good of a job. So, and you're at a place that can't recruit the depth to make up for it. That's the position that Northwestern finds itself in. I'll be curious to see what they're able to do if they want to find another quarterback, because I don't know that I would want to go play behind that offensive line if I'm a quarterback.
That's
right?
real.
They need to demonstrate, I think, some real strides up front if they're going to be in any way enticing to someone who wants to come play his last season of college football, maybe be a little better. They gave up the 3rd most sacks in the country last year, and their new offensive line coach is from Colorado, which is one of the only 2 teams that gave up more sacks than Northwestern last year. It's not a great situation. I don't think.
No, and this is one of those again, like they turned over, this is what happens when a new coach comes in. You sort of have to stick with the staff that was there, but they did turn over the staff, not in an entirely new way, but that's another part of that too. Sometimes when you offensive line coaches and an offensive lineman, man, that's like all players develop relationships with their position coaches, but sometimes like those guys, especially like with a new guy trying to come in and figure out which young guy can play it. That's why they have to figure that out this spring. So like the quarterback situation, I think Brendan Sullivan will handle it, right? Like, even though when we did our list of the quarterbacks, the Northwestern situation was 26th out of 26, just because so many other places brought in definitive transfer answers and Northwestern didn't. They're ready to roll with their guys. So they got to figure out the offensive line first before they really have a chance to figure anything else out. And listen, David Braun, and I think a lot of people noted it and said this is correct, was asked about losing a couple guys in the portal, and did NIL have something to do with that when you lose a guy to Notre Dame? And he was just listen, he graduated, he did a great job. We're sad to see him go, but congratulations. Didn't bemoan what Northwestern is or isn't able to do in NIL compared to other places, and just sort of, wish guys the best. And you got to deal with your situation, but that's, when we think about transferring and NIL and that kind of thing, yes, Northwestern's going to bring in some transfers, but a lot of the times they brought in an offensive line transfer, I think from Texas Tech. I think it is, that has a chance to maybe help them a little bit and patch, some of the holes in the offensive line. But more often than not, a school like this is going to get bit by having truly elite programs pluck off a couple of their top dudes. What are you going to do? Notre Dame, speaking of Notre Dame, they are up next March 7th So they are just underway. We are recording this on March 7th as Notre Dame is practicing for the first time this spring. 18 of 35 guys, their top 35, 18 back, which is not a ton. 10-3 a year ago. Did make some changes on the coaching staff. Marcus Freeman fired the receivers coach, brought in a new receivers coach. The offensive coordinator left. We liked the hire of Mike Denbrock as the new offensive coordinator coming back to Notre Dame after being at LSU. Spring game on April 20, but what is it that they really need to get after this spring?
They need to replace the best tackle in college football and then their other tackle, who was pretty good. I think there was a time when people thought that Joe Alt and Blake Fisher like might be on parallel paths to becoming like the two best tackles in college football, and that didn't quite come to fruition. But Blake Fisher was still pretty good.
I
So
think
Notre
Blake
Dame,
Fisher was like the first true freshman to start at tackle for Notre Dame in like eons or something.
yeah, and like never got to the heights that Joe Alt. The Joe Alt's going to be a top 10 pick, probably. Blake Fisher maybe more like a third round pick, but still third round pick is a very good college football player. So they're replacing those two pillars on the outside of their offensive line. They're actually positioned okay, I think, on the interior, but these are two pretty big question marks for a team that I think wants to be kind of defined by its offensive line play. Joe Alt's shoes are big ones to fill, and as are Blake Fisher's. And it's interesting to me that for a program that historically has recruited the offensive line quite well, I don't know if there are answers at tackle that like blow you away with Notre Dame at the moment. There's Charles Jagusaw, who's a sophomore, true sophomore, who's a pretty highly regarded recruit. Like people were very excited about him. Figured he'd be in a position to start going into this season. Start at the Sun Bowl. Played okay, I think, given the circumstances. But he only played 5 other snaps the rest of last season. So he has 1 start and 5 snaps under his belt. That's all he's played. And the other leading option seems like it's Tosh Baker, who's going into his 5th year, but like hasn't played a lot for a guy who's going into his 5th year. He has 4 career starts. One of them was as like a bonus 6th offensive lineman last year against Ohio State when Notre Dame opened in a jumbo package. So it's more like 3 career starts. A little bit up and down, and then there's just like not a lot of depth, I think, at that position. There's a lot of young guys there. The third guy who's probably in that mix is Emil Wagner, who is an Ohio kid. Who I remember when he was being recruited, like no one questioned his talent. Everyone wondered whether or not he'd ever get big enough to actually play tackle. And he's in his 3rd year at Notre Dame, and he's still 284 pounds. So I don't know if that's like actually a viable option for Notre Dame. And I'm not like putting Notre Dame on portal watch to go find an offensive lineman. I think they will roll with what they have, but I think it's a spot worth looking at for them this season for sure, and a spot they have to get shored up here in spring ball is making sure they have the right guys there to replace, two of the top probably 30 tackles in college football last year.
You know what this is really reminding me of? What Ohio State was going through last year after losing Paris Johnson to the top 10 of the NFL draft. So he's Joe Alt. And then they lost DeJuan Jones to the 4th round of the NFL draft. So he's Blake Fisher. And then guess what? Like Ohio State's tackles last year weren't as good as Paris Johnson and DeJuan Jones.
They were not.
And it was like it was like the number 1 issue for Ohio State in the preseason a year ago. I thought it was potentially disastrous. And I think I don't think you would categorize the offensive line, specifically the tackle play at Ohio State last year, as disastrous, but it certainly wasn't as good as the year before. And it certainly wasn't up to the normal standard. So sometimes I think at places like Ohio State and Notre Dame and Michigan and Oregon, you can make assumptions about like, next man up, whatever, all that stuff everybody says. And sometimes like it's not the same. So Notre Dame, even in a situation where, right, lots of high hopes for what Notre Dame might be this season. It's not that they're going to find tackle play as good as Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. It's like, are they going to be able to get by? Like good enough that it doesn't mess up their season? Because I think going into last year for Ohio State, it was just, can you get to the point where your tackles aren't getting blown up 10 times a game and ruining your offense and creating, allowing turnovers and sacks and that kind of thing. And I think that's what Notre Dame has to be shooting for. But if they don't get there, this is the kind of thing that could sidetrack them on what some people might think could be an undefeated season. And it starts this spring trying to figure this out.
Yeah, and I guess like the counter to that probably is that like Riley Leonard's athleticism might help mitigate that some at the quarterback position, which
Yeah.
is true. Um, but you're just looking for potential vulnerabilities for teams like Notre Dame that are playoff caliber teams that we think like I don't know might have an outside shot of contending for a national championship. Maybe that's overstating it, but one of the top 15 teams in college football. You want to look for potential stress points, and tackle feels like it could be one depending on how the spring goes.
All right, next team up. These are the teams that haven't quite started yet with their spring practices, but are about to. Boston College will kick off spring practice on March 11th, their spring game on April 13th. They have 23 of their top 35 back, which is pretty good. It's from a bowl team last year, 7-6. Of course, as we know, they lost Jeff Hafley, who left Boston College to become the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. They hired Bill O'Brien, the former Penn State head coach, the former Houston Texans head coach, the former offensive coordinator of the New England Patriots, and the 3-week offensive coordinator for the Ohio State Buckeyes before he took the Boston College job. 6 new assistants, so he did keep 4 guys around, which I think is when you're getting in that late, it's always good. Everybody keeps at least one guy. You always want to be like the one guy that's like, I'm very well liked here. Keep me. But he kept 4. And man, oh man, like, can we get a secret camera embedded at Boston College spring practice for Bill to watch this as Bill O'Brien, an offensive quarterback guy, gets to work with Thomas Castellanos, one of the most exciting quarterbacks in the Power 5, but also one of the biggest wild cards. And so what Bill O'Brien and this new offense, this new passing game could look like, right? With the talent of Thomas Castellanos, like, aren't you super intrigued how this will begin to shake out this spring?
Yeah, I'm just curious, like what's the ceiling for Thomas Castellanos as a passer? Because I don't know what it is. It's an
Well,
adventure, and it's an adventure watching him throw the football all the
but
time.
isn't it, this is the guy you want to try to help figure that out,
Hundred
right?
percent. Yeah, exactly. If
So
ever,
this is on O'Brien. This is a perfect, this is like a good marriage here to try to make this happen, because it wasn't what they were doing last year. Thomas Castellanos, according to PFF, led the Power 5 with 25 turnover worthy plays as a quarterback. That, again, was more than anybody for the Power Conference teams. His ADOT, which is average depth of target, was 10.4, which was 11th in the Power 5, which means they were taking this like kind of inaccurate guy and making him throw down the field constantly. And like, hey, like, let's do that. Let's throw a deep ball. There is very little chance this is going to work, but we're going to keep the defense honest kind of stuff, right? Which is just like, what are you doing here? They were 110th in all of college, major college football, with 182 passing yards per game. But I do think they have some guys. They have Lewis Bond as their number 1 receiver. He had 52 catches for 646 last year. He's back. Jaron Bradley is a transfer from Texas Tech. He's 6'5". The last 2 seasons combined, he's had 87 catches for 1,175 yards. They had a good freshman last year who showed some stuff. Like, I think they have like real pass catchers. They just need to devise an offense that can actually put Thomas Castellanos in situations to actually succeed, which is probably, right, get the ball out of his hands a little bit, quick stuff inside, quick
yeah,
making everything down the field. And like Bo Nix's ADOT last year was like 6 something. So Bo Nix is a Heisman finalist throwing the ball on average 6 yards down the field. Thomas Castellanos is throwing it almost twice as far down the field on the average play. Why? What is
yeah.
that? Bill O'Brien can fix that starting this spring. Yes.
I think he can, and I think there is maybe a little bit of a course correction here, just in terms of the plan of how you want to use him. I'm looking at Thomas Castellanos's passing depth numbers. 20% of his attempts were 20 plus yards down the field, and he only completed 30% of them.
Okay.
22% were between 10 and 19 yards, and he only completed 36% of them. Like, so like half basically of his attempts are like kind of down the field, and he completes them at like a 34% clip.
Yeah.
Just pull it back. Just pull it back a
Yeah.
little bit. let him throw it a little bit shorter. Let him use his legs because he is one of the more dynamic running quarterbacks in the country. I know I said the other day that Riley Leonard might be the best. Thomas Castellanos might take exception to that. So like there's tools there for sure. I just don't know if he was always put in the best position to succeed.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess you trust Bill O'Brien to put him in better spots, right? And we'll see what that bears out.
There's a lot going on at BC. They think they might be moving to more like a maybe like a 3-4 defense with the new defensive coordinator as opposed to what they did last year. So like there's a lot of moving parts, but the idea of a veteran offensive mind who's coached Deshaun Watson and legends like Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi and just legends of
Matt
Northeastern who?
Matt McGloin.
Matt McGloin. So, like, the hands that molded Matt McGloin, you want him to get into that clay that is Thomas Castellanos. That again, he's played enough to know what's up, but clearly still moldable. So, like, I actually I like this marriage. Again, it makes me like, you want to watch Pitt spring football? I want to watch Boston College spring football to see what they can do here.
Yeah, no, me too. I think it'll be fun. Yeah,
spring football's cool, people. All right, next, Penn State, which will kick off spring practice on March 12th, spring game on April 13th. The top 24 are back from a 10-3 season a year ago. 2 new assistants, and it's the 2 coordinators, as everybody knows. Tom Allen, former Indiana head coach, is now the defensive coordinator, taking over from Manny Diaz, who took the head coaching job at Duke, and Mike Yurcich, fired in the waning days of last season. Andy Kotelnicki, coming in from Kansas, is now in charge of that offense, and like it's go time for a playoff contender. What's the big thing this spring, Bill?
Yeah, I think I worded it as, will the combination of Andy Kotelnicki and Drew Aller hit, but it's just maybe more generally like, what's up with the offense, right? They're kind of, I don't know if changing their offensive identity is the right way to put it, but they're just not good enough on that side of the ball, I think, to contend the way that they want to contend. And we all know last year they struggled with explosive plays. They just weren't really a dynamic offense. And part of that is scheme, certainly. But part of it too is like getting the best out of Drew Aller, I think. And if that he wasn't as best as a second-year player, I think is perfectly reasonable. But I also don't know if you saw like growth throughout the year either. It felt like to me they just kind of like stayed the same, and plateaued maybe a little bit. And I think like Andy Kotelnicki, and they have like a weird thing going on with their coaching staff where like their quarterbacks coach is like actually a graduate assistant. But he has a label of quarterbacks coach, but he is like officially a quarterback or a graduate assistant. And James Franklin is involved with quarterbacks as well. Like all that combined, I think needs to get Drew Aller to a different level than where he was last year. And I think that's mostly on the OC, like devising an offense just sort of like more exciting and creative and kind of fun to play in, and has more of like an attacking mindset than what felt a little bit like a kind of a passive approach last year, where they were just kind of concerned with sitting on the ball, controlling it. Like, be more aggressive, I think, is what they want to be this year. And I'm wondering what that might bring out of Drew Aller. And like, certainly that's a season long question, right? I know we're focused more narrowly on spring here, but it starts now. Like, you need to see whatever is observed of spring practice for Penn State, and then certainly when Penn State plays its spring game, like, you want to see a more dynamic, more aggressive Drew Aller than I think what we saw out of him last year.
Watch spring practice. This is another fan base that like has to watch spring practice, because don't you want to see Drew Aller like letting it rip some? Mm-hmm. And I think like what really got Mike Yurcich fired last year, that Penn State lost at Ohio State in a game where it just felt like they didn't even try anything for 3 quarters. And they got down 2 scores, and then they let Drew Aller throw the ball a little bit. And of course, now at that point, Ohio State's playing softer defensively, but like Penn State went right down the field and scored. And it was like, why didn't you even try that before? So in a world where Keandre Lambert-Smith is back as a number 1 receiver, people weren't 100% sure he'd be back. They added Julian Fleming from Ohio State. They still have a good tight end, even though do you also do this? Like, I get him. Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren were the main tight ends for Penn State last year, right? Theo Johnson was at the combine. Tyler Warren is back. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then like Theo Johnson at the combine was like, I'm 6'10" and I run a 4.2. and everybody, I was watching, I don't watch a ton of combine stuff, but you're watching that a little bit and it's like, this guy might be the second tight end off the board after Brock Bowers. And then it makes me think, did they throw to him? Like I remember, right? Like I can remember thinking like, oh, this is a good tight end combo at Penn State, but it's just like another example of like, we talked a lot last year. Penn State maybe didn't have good enough receivers. I think they had pretty good tight ends and didn't feel like they took advantage of it. Right? Didn't feel like they made
Yeah.
people pay. So it's like, can Andy Kotelnicki come in, bring out the best of Drew Aller and like attack using their actual best weapons, right? Okay, I get it. Maybe you don't have all 5-star receivers, but use what you got. And I think a lot of the time last year, again, the worst stat in the world was Drew Aller didn't throw an interception for the first 340 passes of his career or whatever. And it's because they didn't. Thomas Castellanos, he's dropping back and throwing the ball 50 yards downfield every play. And he's like, I threw 14 picks. And they were like, sorry, man. Drew Aller's throwing all his passes behind the line of scrimmage. And they're like, way to be perfect, Drew. And he's like, can I maybe throw it 8 yards down the field? Find a happy medium, Boston College and Penn State. But they have to let it rip a little bit. And it has to start now.
Yeah, and I do think it's not for me. I watched like a decent amount of Drew Aller in high school, so maybe I'm a little bit jaded by that. But like, I don't think it is an issue of Drew Aller being incapable of like being that kind of quarterback. I just think it like needs to be like coached out of him a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Let it rip.
Yeah.
In Happy Valley. When we come back, we have what do we have? We have 5 more teams to do. 13 teams here on our part 1 of our Northern Football Mega Spring Preview. We'll be back with Team 9. It's Utah. We'll do that next, right after this. Back now with Team 9 in our Mega Spring Preview. It is the Utah Utes who open spring practice on March 12th. They will have their spring game on April 13th. No coaching changes. Of the 13 teams that we went through for this, they are the only one with no coaching changes. It's kind of how they do it. It works. Kyle Whittingham's good at this. 22 of their top 35 are back, which is kind of an average number. 8-5 a year ago, which for Utah was a drop off considering, they've been making Rose Bowl appearances. But they have, I think, 18 starters back, which is pretty crazy. And that includes, so it's like their 2 best players did not play last year. And they're like 14th year college guys. So quarterback Cam Rising and tight end Brant Keithy both thought it felt like, okay, they're going to be hurt to start the 2023 season. And then they didn't play at all. Yep. And now they both stuck around and they're both back. They have 4 starters back on the offensive line. They have 4 starters back on the defensive line. They are just veteran guys all over the place. So the one place I think this spring, well, maybe they're looking for something, is they lost 2 of the best safeties in the old Pac-12, in Sione Vaki, who was a safety and a running back last year, and Cole Bishop, who was excellent for 3 years. And so, what does Utah need to do this spring? It's like keep Cam Rising and Brant Keithy healthy. But actually, this is like one spot on a very deep veteran team where they do need some help. They brought in an all Pac-12 safety from Stanford who might fill one of the spots. But it's like actually Utah doesn't have a ton to get done this spring. We had mentioned before, you brought up Dorian Singer as a transfer receiver, as a guy who maybe can stretch the field for them in a different way, as something new. So it's like integrating a guy like that. But like Utah's kind of loaded, brother. So like they kind of just got to stay healthy and do what they do. But that's 2 big losses with Vaki and Bishop.
No, they are 2 big losses, but it's also like I don't know. I'm not going to lose sleep over Utah having to replace some starters either, right? It just seems like they seem to almost always nail it with their evaluations and development, and like there will probably be somebody ready. And I don't mean to be dismissive of it or give them too much benefit of the doubt there, but I do feel like in some respects they've earned it, at least on that side of the ball. So it does seem like they're kind of just in maintenance mode for the most part, like making sure they get through spring healthy and build it up for next year. I'm more curious about what's going on the offensive side, just integrating Cam Rising back into it, integrating Brant Keithy back into it, trying to find a little more explosion, trying to find a way to like stay healthy at running back, which is a real challenge for them last year, like that kind of stuff. I'd be surprised if we're in the middle of the season talking about defensive shortcomings with Utah. It just feels like kind of like a foreign idea to me.
Yeah, they're ready to roll, man. Like this, and this is one of those like spring football, maybe not that interesting for Utah. But it's going to be really interesting. Fall football at Utah.
Yeah.
This is why we both think that they are the leading contender to win the new Big 12. So like this is Utah, not super interesting now. Super interesting in September, though. All right, team number 10 on our current list, starting spring practice on March 14th. It's the Oregon Ducks. Spring game a little bit later on April 27th. Only one new assistant. Basically, everybody stayed with Dan Lanning. 20 of their top 35 back. And that includes, like, they're replacing some real dudes. They lost Bucky Irving at running back. They lost Troy Franklin at receiver. They lost Bo Nix at quarterback, but also like this is a place that has a ton of talent. So 12-2 Oregon a year ago with both losses to Washington. What are they trying to get done this spring, Bill?
Yeah, this is not like a flashing red light kind of question, I don't think, but it is something that's mildly intriguing, I think, especially as Oregon transitions to the Big Ten, which is a more rugged conference, I think. Is that fair to say, than what they're used to playing week to week?
It's one of those things, right? So it's one of these things. This is in life, right? That there are cliches and stereotypes, and 3 yards in a cloud of dust, right? Was slapped on the Big Ten in the Woody Hayes days, and it's not that, right? It's not.
Yeah.
But when you look like at the stats for the Big Ten, like collectively in the nation, and they're always have like 7 of the best 10 defenses by some of the generic defensive stats and that kind of thing. Part of that is because the offenses often across the board aren't as explosive and the quarterbacks aren't quite as good, and that's real. And then also what's real is they play really good defense in the Big Ten, and they play physical defense, and they have good linebackers, and they have good defensive tackles. So I don't think it is like, I think you can almost go like all the way back around of like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. It's like, oh, that's not true or whatever. And then you can think like, there's no difference between the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. Like, it's just whatever. But then I actually think there is a difference. Like, I think you are correct here to wonder, just because it doesn't mean like Oregon's not better than Wisconsin and Iowa and Minnesota and Nebraska and all these teams, but like they're going to make them earn it. Right. And so that includes up front.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like week to week, maybe you have to earn it a little more kind of in the trenches. And it's not a talent issue for Oregon. It's more of an experience thing. Like they've recruited pretty well on the defensive lines. I just think they're going to be in a position where they're going to be relying on a lot of second year, potentially first year defensive linemen to play the way that they want to play. They had 10 defensive linemen play at least 200 snaps last year, which is a pretty high number. It's inflated a little bit because Oregon plays like a 3-4, and it's kind of like 5 defensive linemen playing at once is how it's charted. So that's part of the reason why that number is so high. But even still, it's 10 guys who play 200 snaps. 5 of them are back, but 5 of the top 7 are gone. So like it's the bottom half of that rotation that now has to rise up and play a little better. And probably some younger guys who just haven't played that much are going to have to play a whole heck of a lot more than they played last year. And it's not merely a Big Ten conversation. I think you got to be deep on the defensive line to get through the college football playoff and ultimately win a national championship. And I think the depth of Oregon's defensive line could get tested this year. Like there's just not, in my opinion, there's not a whole lot of questions about Oregon. Like they're good at linebacker. What they lost in the secondary, I think they've done a pretty good job of addressing. I know they have new faces on offense, but they seem to do a pretty good job addressing that too. And like the offensive line, I think is gonna be really good. Like they'll have a good quarterback. They have good receivers. They'll have a good running game. It's the other side of the line, I think, where like maybe they could be coming up a little short if this spring doesn't yield a couple of younger defensive linemen, I think, that show themselves ready to take on a bigger workload this year. And they did add already one guy through the transfer portal on the defensive line. They brought in Jamari Caldwell from Houston, who was like a second team All Big 12 guy last year, like good presence in the middle. I could see them looking to add another maybe after spring ball, but until that happens, it's about, developing I think there's like 6, I think in the freshman and sophomore classes, they have, I believe it's 6 guys who are like top 150 or better high school prospects. So it's more about bringing those guys along this spring to make sure that the defensive line's where it needs to be.
Is there anything else with the guys they lost that you feel like there's stuff they're looking for this spring, or are they just, I mean, I know you like Jordan James. He was part of our Heisman conversation as the guy taking over for Bucky Irving. They still have Tayshaun Holden and Tez Johnson at receiver. Like, do they have any other things where they're searching, or are they just like good to go?
I mean, they have to replace the best center in college football, Jackson Powers Johnson, right? He's gone, so that's a thing. But I think they feel okay about that. And I don't know. I guess, like, are we 100% certain that Dylan Gabriel's their quarterback? Like, maybe that's a question that's out there as well with Dante Moore being there. So like nothing glaring, but like there's some stuff on the edges. I think like they got Evan Stewart from Texas A&M, who like I think they would love if he could be the replacement for Troy Franklin, but like I don't think Evan Stewart's like quite lived up to the 5-star billing when he went to A&M. Like, can he be that kind of player for them? Maybe is a lingering question as well, but it's not like it's not anything that makes me second guess their ability to go win a national championship, I guess.
All right, so Oregon's going to be good. Congratulations to Oregon. Ohio State at Oregon, man. Woo, that's going to be something. All right, next up, Purdue. Purdue is starting spring practice a little bit later, so we're getting to some of these teams now, like kind of the next week. So this is not right around the corner. So this is a little bit of an early preview. March 19th for Purdue starts. Spring game on April 13th. They have a spring game again last year. They didn't have a spring game because they were doing construction to Ross-Ade Stadium. They're back now. One new assistant in year 2 of Ryan Walters as the head coach. Only 18 of the top 35 back, which is not a ton. 4-8 a year ago. And they brought in 14 transfers. And this is where I'm intrigued by this. Obviously, it's nothing new to bring in transfers, but like Purdue's like kind of trumpeting this a little bit. I think 4 of the transfers are from Georgia, like not the state of Georgia, but from the program of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at Purdue last year, like Kydron Jenkins is back this year as the leading returning sack guy in the North. So like he's back. Nick Skirton, they lost to Texas A&M because he was so good. He's transferred to Texas A&M. Like, you know, Deion Burks was really good last year. Like they've had some good players. They kind of had a weird year last year. Like they just were kind of average at a lot of stuff. Like their defense was okay. Their offense was okay. They went 4-8. And I think there's some perception of like, you know, Jeff Brom went out with the Big Ten championship game appearance in 2022, right? And then they sent Aiden O'Connell off to the NFL and he started games in the NFL as a rookie. And maybe there was some stuff, there was maybe actually more to do at Purdue than maybe that season would have told you, that like Jeff Brom went off at a peak, but actually Ryan Walters had some work to do. So I'm intrigued by this, Landis, because it feels like a very like necessary. They lost a lot of guys and they just need an influx of talent, but they're also like, I think they're shooting their shot here a little bit. And let's bring in a bunch of these guys. It's some guys from Georgia. I think there's somebody from Franklin College, like a step up from a lower level, who was an All-American at a lower level. I think they brought in like an All-MAC guy, right? There's different level of guys. And we saw Mel Tucker at Michigan State early on there, like win 11 games and do this. Like they brought in Kenneth Walker III, and they brought in a bunch of transfers and made the Peach Bowl. And then like it wasn't sustainable with that way, right? So like I don't think Ryan Walters can plan to do this and be trumpeting 14 transfers and like think. But like right now, I think it's a good idea. Like they need an influx a little bit. And so also in the portal, we talked about this, like with Pitt getting Eli Holstein and with Iowa getting Caden Proctor and Ohio State getting Caleb Downs. Like, oh, Bama's got guys who are leaving, get them in the North. Georgia's got some second and third teamers who are unhappy, get them to the North, right? So I kind of like what Purdue's doing here. That doesn't mean it's going to work, but they got 14 transfers to roll out there this spring to see if a couple of them can maybe hit.
Yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind taking a big transfer class to try to jumpstart something if the long game is still like creating a sustainability like through high school recruiting. Because I just like, if you're trying to do this every year, I think it's difficult, and that seemed to happen with Michigan State. But I don't mind it early on in the tenure of Ryan Walters. And it's like you look at some of the guys they brought in, and I know it's probably dubious to look at high school rankings of guys who were transfers in like X number of years into their college career. But like half of the guys that they brought in, I think, or nearly half of the guys they brought in were once like 4-star or better high school prospects, and like the idea of Notre Dame even having like that many former 4-star high school prospects on its roster is like kind of crazy to think about because they just don't recruit that way. So I do think it could give them a jolt of talent. I would have thought maybe they would have tried to do more on the defensive side. It seems like maybe more of the transfers are on the offensive side. And I think like the first year returns from Ryan Walters, defensive head coach on that side of the ball, were not quite as good as people were hoping they would be. But they also have some like in-house talent that I think can help get them there too. So I like it. It doesn't guarantee success, but I like taking the swing at a place like Purdue. And now we just have to see over these 15 practices if it looks like a noticeably more talented Purdue team.
4 guys from Georgia. They brought in Cam Brown as a receiver from UCLA. He's a 6th-year guy who has 26 career starts in college football. They brought in Reggie Love, who was Illinois' leading rusher last year. Jira Ojada, who I mentioned was the conference player of the year at Franklin University at a lower level a season ago. Corey Stewart was a first-team All-MAC player on the offensive line that they brought in. And then Joey Tanona is a really interesting guy. He was a 4-star recruit on the offensive line at Notre Dame, and he got in a car accident and medically retired and like missed 2 years and then said like, I'm back. I'm okay. And he transferred to Purdue. And it's like, if without that unfortunate accident, who knows, this was a big time player, big time recruit at Notre Dame. So like, again, there's like, you never know. Sometimes it's the guy from a national championship contender who couldn't get on the field because there were too many good players ahead of him. Sometimes it's a guy coming up from a lower level who was awesome there. And it's like, yeah, it translates, right? I mean, Jared Verse at Florida State started his career at Albany, right? I mean, it feels like Purdue is like run the gamut. They've brought in every kind of transfer you can bring in. And so again, as a long-term plan, no. As a jump start, yes. So again, Purdue, a reason to watch spring football because there's some guys who have played some college football that just aren't familiar to Boilermaker fans that have a chance to impact this program right now. Michigan State is next. Michigan State also will start spring practice on March 19th, the spring game on April 20th. This is new head coach Jonathan Smith and 9 of the 10 new assistants. Only 18 of the top 35 are back from a 4-8 season a year ago. By the way, I meant to mention it before. I think it's probably something we should have delved into deeper. Maybe we did on a show. Harlan Barnett, who was the interim head coach last year for Michigan State after all the Mel Tucker stuff happened, got hired by Northwestern this offseason. And like on the list of like coaching moves, I think David Braun bringing in Harlan Barnett at Northwestern is one of the best coaching moves that got made in the North. And I don't want to let that fly under the radar because it reminds me a little bit of Larry Johnson leaving Penn State after being there for so long and the impact that Larry Johnson has made at Ohio State. And I think that Harlan Barnett being at Michigan State for so long and then like it's time to go. And to grab him, like there can be a lot of great coaching life left in guys like that. And so for a young head coach like David Braun to bring in somebody like Harlan Barnett, I think it's a great move for Northwestern. But we're getting back to Michigan State with Jonathan Smith, this entire new staff. What are you watching this spring, Bill?
Well, it actually, I guess, is related to Harlan Barnett because there was a time when Harlan Barnett was at Michigan State where Michigan State had a pass defense that would scare the crap out of teams, right? The no-fly zone. We're not too far removed from the no-fly zone. And I think that obviously there were a lot of things about the end of Mel Tucker's tenure there that were embarrassing, I think, for Michigan State. But on the field, like one of the things that was like maybe the most puzzling thing to me is just how bad Michigan State's pass defense got with Mel Tucker there, like as a defensive backs guy and defensive guy himself. It was like they've been terrible the last 3 years in pass defense. And clearly there's more going on at Michigan State, right? You could probably pick anything at any position if you want to throw it out there as the most pressing question for Michigan State with the turnover they've had and the change in coaching. So maybe this isn't the number one thing on everyone's mind, but it's the thing that I thought of first because I've just seen this pass defense get torched too many times the last 3 years, and I think they need to get better. And I think they have an opportunity to because they have basically their entire secondary is back. The top 5 guys in the secondary and snaps, I believe, are all back this year. So, and like sometimes you run into a situation where like, is that the best thing in the world if you're bringing back guys from the defense that weren't that good? It's a fair question, right? But I think there's like enough youth there too that you could be encouraged or at least optimistic that it's going to get better. And then you have Joe Rossi coming in as a defensive coordinator, who I think pretty highly of. I know his last season at Minnesota wasn't his best season there, but he's got a pretty good track record. So I think there's reason to be like bullish on a little bit of a defensive turnaround at Michigan State, but I think it needs to start with them not being so porous against the pass, because it's just hard to win games if you can't stop teams throwing the ball in the air. Like if you're just like constantly playing catch up, like it's a really hard road to hoe. And Michigan State needs to get better there. So I'm kind of on alert for that this spring to see if there are any strides made there.
What if you could get your hands on recordings of the Mel Tucker phone calls that was just him like bemoaning Michigan State's pass defense the whole time?
Pass defense. Yeah.
It's just like, man, what happened to the no-fly zone? It's like, oh, he's sad. And this is in a world like you're interested in the Michigan State pass defense in a world where you have predicted that new Michigan State quarterback Aiden Childs will be a Heisman Trophy finalist sometime in the next 3 years. So you are also super excited to see Aiden Childs, who was the backup at Oregon State last year, start his first opportunity as the real starting quarterback anywhere as a year two college football player.
Absolutely. I didn't want to. We need to have another Aiden Childs conversation.
Okay, congratulations. Good job by you.
Yeah,
to not have our whole show not just be quarterbacks. So they got a lot to fix. But again, I think there's a lot of room. There's a lot of reason for optimism. And I hope this was a lousy couple years for Michigan State fans, because you think of the way that like Mark D'Antonio went out, and that was messy after a great run of like double-digit wins, like whatever it was, 8 times in a decade for under Mark D'Antonio, and then for that to fall apart, and then their coaching search was kind of clunky, and they wind up with Mel Tucker. That's like, Mel Tucker, he's a Midwest guy. He's from Cleveland. He played at Wisconsin. He's coached at Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State in the NFL. He's the interim head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like, what a resume. They pull him away from Colorado after just 1 year there. And you think like, like, wow. After this difficult situation, like Michigan State landed on its feet, and then they pay him $90 million. They give him a huge extension to get him to stay after they win 11 games right when he gets there in year 2. And then it's like, oh no, that also fell apart. So like Michigan State fans just need to be able to focus on football for a little bit. And we like the Jonathan Smith hire, and they're hopefully between Aiden Childs and an improved defense and a lot of other things, there's things for the Spartans to focus on beyond, that other stuff. All right, last team. Here's the deal. From now, maybe until December, when I talk about Iowa football, you have got to strap in, because it is going to be wild, because I am loading up the bandwagon, brother. Like we did it before when we were doing our 10 guys to watch in spring football. I talked about Brian Allen, a third-year edge rusher, and say like he's this new guy, but they have 12 of their top 15 defenders back. And now I'm going through stuff for this. 27 of their top 35 guys back for Iowa. So yeah, they're losing Cooper DeJean, and that hurts. And yeah, they're losing a couple other guys, but like what they have in place, and then they fixed their biggest problem. And we know what it was. But offensively, to replace Brian Ferentz as the offensive coordinator with Tim Lester, maybe not everybody loved the hire, but there's nowhere to go but up. And they also fired the receivers coach and brought in somebody new, like the area where like it wasn't getting done. So this is a team that is starting practice on March 20th. They were a 10-win team last year. And I'm watching for this spring, Landis. They have 4 offensive linemen back, plus they added 5-star left tackle Caden Proctor, who started at left tackle for Alabama last year. They have tight end Luke Lachey back, who was hurt for most of last year. They have starting quarterback Cade McNamara back, who was hurt for most of last year. They have Caleb Brown back as a guy, an Ohio State transfer who was working his way in as like maybe the best receiver threat last year. He's now has a full year of experience under him. They have LaShawn Williams back as their number 1 running back. Like they have so much back. And now you're going to see what Tim Lester's version of this offense looks like starting this spring. And I am giving Iowa fans permission to think if the offense is just a little above average, is Iowa a playoff team? And when we were talking about this a little bit earlier on Thursday, you brought up the schedule. The schedule is very manageable, but like, I'm not even talking schedule. I'm talking loaded for, like, this might be, as we have lined up like winning formulas in the North, right? And when we did the shows, when the playoff was here, and I got mad at everybody that thought Michigan was only experienced and was not talented, like Michigan was both. Washington was really super duper experienced, which about the 6-year guys. I think Iowa is like kind of in between, right? I'm not saying the Iowa talent across the board is what Michigan had a year ago, and they're not. I think they might be like more naturally talented than Washington, but I think they are in that realm, somewhere between being super old and being very talented and also coincidentally experienced. But whatever that range is, it's a playoff range. And so they just have to be better than terrible on offense. And I think they really have a chance. So all eyes on this offense this spring. But even as Brian Ferentz deserved every bit of criticism that he got last year, he absolutely deserved to lose his job. But they did lose their quarterback and their best offensive skill player in Luke Lachey to injury last year. And it was like, man, so just those guys back. Oh, Landis, I think they're going to be good. So I don't know if to be great. You don't need to see a high flying Iowa offense this spring. Moderately functional. And let's not make punt jokes anymore. Can we stop punting jokes? Punting jokes is what you do when you're trying to go 8-4. You know who doesn't make jokes about punting? Playoff teams. So let's talk about defense. Let's talk about complimentary football. But I don't want, if you have a punting is winning shirt as an Iowa Hawkeye fan, I'm not telling you to burn it. I'm just telling you to put it in the drawer for this year and get a "Here Comes the Playoff" t-shirt, because let's raise the standard in Iowa City. Woo!
I cannot believe you've gotten here so quickly.
Hot. Woo! It's hot. No, but listen. People think I am anti-Iowa or that I hate Kirk Ferentz. I don't. I had one gigantic problem with Iowa football, and they rectified it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all in.
I don't even think it has to be above average, right? It can just be average, right? And they'll make they won 10 games with terrible last year.
It could maybe even be slightly below average. Like, honestly, like, could you have like the 70th best offense instead of in the hundreds? That might be enough. But I do, and honestly, like, it's a crazy comparison, and it's a northern version of this, whatever. But like, what Georgia was in 2021, when it was such a defense first team, and it was like they didn't even know who their quarterback, right? They changed quarterbacks in the middle of the year, and they didn't really want to go to Stetson Bennett. Nobody thought that Georgia offense was great, but like it was good enough. Then year 2 with Stetson Bennett, actually Stetson Bennett leads Georgia down the field, and they actually are winning with offense for the second national title. But the first national title for Georgia was all defense. And in terms of Iowa getting to the playoff being the comparison to winning the national title, I'm not saying Iowa's going to win the national title, but I think like it's like that. Like, can Cade McNamara be a northern version of 2021 Stetson Bennett? 2022 Stetson Bennett like would have won the postseason Heisman, so not that. But Cade McNamara has been a playoff quarterback. Maybe the comparison is just 2021 Michigan with Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo and Dax Hill and all these great defensive players. Just do that. Why can't Iowa be what that Michigan team was? That wasn't a great offensive Michigan team, but they played complimentary football. Oh, I'm comparing. Let me just talk about why can't the Iowa Hawkeyes be the Kansas City Chiefs? They're right down the road. Why can't they be the Purple People Eaters? I'm not trying to compare Iowa football to every good football team that's ever existed. I'm just saying there's actually a depth of talent here. Like, for real, like when you run through defensively what they have, they're adding Caden Proctor. Caden Proctor might be an All-American left tackle this year, right? I mean, he had a rough beginning of a true freshman year at Alabama. By the end of the year at Alabama, he was pretty good and good enough to play for a playoff team. Now he's coming home. He might be Robert Gallery, man. Like, is he like, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Stop.
think so.
Is it too much? Where's the line? Where's the line?
I
The
think we've
greatest
crossed
Iowa,
the, I think we've
Bob
crossed the
Feller,
line.
Bob Feller, Niall Kinnick, the 2024 Iowa Hawkeyes, the greatest things in sport in the history of the state.
I can't wait for you now. You're going to be on every radio station in Iowa next week, trumpeting playoff Iowa.
I want Kirk Ferentz to come on the show. That's really one of the goals. Like, I don't want to fight with him, but like, I want to talk about football with him. And like the idea of like, there really is a thing to me of like, what happens to a team when you take away the thing that had been holding them back, right? Like you don't know what is possible. And let's not forget, like, 2002, man, Iowa and Ohio State were both undefeated in the Big Ten. And like, I mean, there have been versions of Iowa and it's been clouded the last couple of years, but because Iowa was a joke. I don't know that people need to be reminded, but Iowa is not just like a solid winning program. Iowa has truly had some peaks. Iowa, right, like played into the final minutes against Michigan State in 15 to make the playoff, right, in a 4-team playoff. Like, this is Iowa at its best is a second-tier program. Honestly, I think, right? Like, and again, like, and I don't like it when people think there's only 2 teams in the top tier, but if you think like the top tier in college football is like the 5, like, like the big dogs, right? Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, Michigan now, whatever, right? But if you have a top tier that's like 5 teams and you have a second tier that's like maybe 12 programs, I think the good version of Iowa is in that tier. We just have not seen that because we've gotten the incompetent offense version of Iowa. And I just think it's worth reminding people of that.
It's not far-fetched to say like that Iowa with competent offense is a top 15 team in college football, right? We've seen it happen like nearly 10 times. How many times has Kirk Ferentz finished in the top 10? Like 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times he's finished in the top 10. Has a finish at 15, to finish at 16. That was 2020, and then 3 others in the top 25. Right? It's not.
Yeah,
it's not that large of a leap in logic to think that Iowa could be a playoff team this year.
Like the best version of Iowa, because like by the way, when you have 28 of your top 35 back, and like all these defensive guys stayed, and you're getting your healthy quarterback and your healthy tight end back, and you added a 5-star left tackle, like this is the best version of Iowa. I don't know. And like, I'll be like, this requires research, but like to really drill down on like, could this be Kirk Ferentz's best team?
Oh, that's interesting.
Brad Banks is pretty darn good. Like that was, they've had some really good teams. Could this be Kirk Ferentz's best team? Like, how many NFL defensive players are going to be on this defense? How many NFL offensive linemen are they going to have? And then when you think about the skill guys, right? Like, again, they don't have to be Marvin Harrison Jr., like, but are they elevated over where Iowa has been at times? I just think so. All eyes on this offense, all eyes on, does it look like it has some degree more functionality? And if it does, watch out. And I would expect that it will, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. If that would be, I was like, oh, if you come out of spring and you're like, man, they miss Brian Ferentz, then I'm going to be the saddest boy that ever was.
Then Kirk Ferentz will come on the show to put you in your place.
I mean, like, I would welcome Kirk Ferentz for, if he wants to fight, he can scream at me. Absolutely. Actually, I extend that to all Northern coaches. If you would like to come on the show and scream at me, probably makes for good content. And I very possibly might deserve it, but I also would just like to talk football with you too. So that would be either is available. Okay. So yeah, but like, do you think Tim Lester will be like, are you anticipating above average offense with a new offensive coordinator?
I'm setting my expectations low and merely anticipating average offense.
Okay.
3 touchdowns. That's the number.
You are not invoking 3 touchdowns per game or 3 touchdowns for the whole season?
No, per game.
Okay. I couldn't remember how many of them. If you would have told me that Iowa actually scored 2 offensive touchdowns all of last season, I might have believed it. So, okay. That's it for the 13 teams on this show. BYU, Cincinnati, Pitt, Ohio State, Northwestern, Notre Dame already underway with spring practice. Boston College, Penn State, Utah, Oregon right around the corner. And then the week after that, Purdue, Michigan State, and Iowa are coming. Colorado also starts that week. Michigan starts that week. That's the week in the late teens and 20s when we will do part 2 of this spring mega preview. So Michigan Wolverines are in there. Colorado Buffaloes are in there. Washington Huskies are in there. Syracuse is in there. Iowa State, Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota. If you didn't hear a team now, they're coming. So 13 this show, 13 that later show. Any other last thoughts, Landis, before we let the good folks out of here?
I'm just telling the fine folks of Iowa City to book their tickets to Atlanta now.
Yeah, book the tickets now. And also book me on your shows.
Yes.
All right. Thanks to you guys for making Kings of the North part of your college football experience. Again, twice a week right now on YouTube, on podcasts. Find us, subscribe to us, tell a friend, tell a stranger. July will be going to 5 days a week. For now, thanks to our great producer, Mike Yorostowski, who makes us look good and sound good. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.